And welcome to the Wabanaki Weekly with your host Jared Durrell from CHSR on the unceded territory of the Wabanaki Nation. The Wabanaki Compact referring to the treaties made for the Abenaki, Passamaquoddy, Penobscot, Mi'kmaq, and Wolastoq nations respectively. This week we're going to be looking at indigenous women in politics. We're going to be looking at the appointment of Mary Simon as Governor General of Canada, discussing from Jody Wilson-Raybould to Mumala Kogak the toxic atmosphere of parliamentary politics, as well as a special interview with Russ Diabo. All right. With our first song being Amigdak, a Inuk song about fetching water, which actually is pretty important for the composition and the cultural values that it represents. A lot of the show is going to be in languages you don't understand or do understand. That's your business. But the point is, indigenous languages need to be aired unfettered and unexplained, with context, of course, and respect to the artists that produce them. But I'm already talking too much. Here we go.
Imita kuyaguma swangaya luluakuma aulakuma yagatunga taununga
Imita kuyaguma swangaya luluakuma aulakuma yagatunga taununga Imita tilunga maligu maniruvi malin yakuti taununga
taununga.
And that was Imigdak by Reet, an Inuk song on the importance of collecting water and going out. It's hard to explain when I don't speak Inuk, but the translation is beautiful, and so is the composition, focusing on generations coming together, community, and all that. Next up, we have James Bay by Lloyd Chichu.
When the sun shines, the birds sing as she walks along the shores, James Bay. When the eagle flies high in the sky over the horizon, James Bay. James Bay. When the sun shines, the birds sing as she walks along the shore, James Bay. La, 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 James Bay.
And that was James Bay by Lloyd Chichu, Northern Cree. Not the group of singers, but a Northern Cree gentleman. Next up, we have Shegwan Mag Shedurmag by Group Folklorique Montagnais. And that was Shegwan Mak Shedurumak by Group Montagnais Folklorique, or the folkloric group Montagnais. Next up, we have the audio from Mary Simon's first introduction to the House of Parliament, where she directly addressed former Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau, which will then be followed by her introduction as Governor General of Canada, which is followed by audio from Mumalak Agak, specifically calling the nation to action to investigate residential school sites and turn that into action. Now, with the election and appointment of so many Indigenous women this week, it was easy to miss the fact that Jody Wilson-Raybould will not be coming back to the field of parliamentary politics. There's a full letter on her website, which we will read at another time. Regretfully, we do not have enough time on this show to really get into the confirmation of bodies and other issues. We ran out of time this episode.
I hear all these issues being talked about, and people often don't think as Inuit we get affected by these things. But I could tell you a very sad story about my own mother, who supposedly was not affected by the Indian Act, but she was certainly discriminated against. And thank goodness, because of the James Bay and Northern Quebec Agreement, I have my status back. And you know, I get really concerned when I listen to all of this rhetoric that goes on around the table. And you know, right now I'm very emotional because I don't know what we're trying to do right now. The equality issue is going to be the issue of the afternoon, and at the end of the conference, everybody's going to shake their head and they're going to say, well, we spent way too much time on the equality clause, and yet we're talking about a fundamental right. And I really don't see how we can be respected in this country if we can't even deal with that issue. I would propose that Mr. Penner's recommendation that we go back and review the proposal be accepted, and we'll come back and give our response.
You know, I said yesterday, Mrs. Simon, that we would abolish Section 12(1)B. I'm sorry I spelt out some sociological and historical consequences of it, but we can't hide them. I wish you and your sisters would take it out of your head that somehow we're deliberately trying to frustrate the concept of equality. At least in the law, everybody is assured here, you hear, that we are not. You know, in a sense, you're equal when you think you're equal. And if you think you're unequal, the law won't change much. Simon?
Mr. Prime Minister, I consider myself an equal. I am an Aboriginal representative that represents both male and female persons in northern Quebec. And I've always tried to be very unbiased towards who I represent, because I feel that as people we have one interest, and that is our collective and individual rights. And all I'm saying here is that as someone that represents both sides, I'd like to see the equality clause once and for all settled, because there's this uncertainty that we keep presenting to you, and at the same time you're saying that you would go along with an additional guarantee that it's clear, and at the same time we can't seem to settle it. And it's now 3:35, and I don't see how we can go on much longer with this.
I had one delegate from the
And that was Mary Simon in 1984 addressing then Prime Minister Pierre Elliott Trudeau regarding equality and gender parity and fighting for status rights for using the James Bay Agreement. Honestly, a monumental and not really well recorded event, but I'm glad there was a copy of the audio from it. that 1984 summit was really important. Now, here we have Mary Simon, Governor General, speaking to the nation for the first time.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Prime Minister. First, I just want to say a few words in Inuktitut, so if anybody has a translator. So, ulakuilun nasi ulumi nakomero mayunga kanata angayokha maringanik ta ko hausriyangit ulumi pimariumata kanata sibulipami nunakakasi mayumik inumik inutuinamik dilijimata tatsamunga Governor General of Canada tayo yumut inihaknea matana nakomero tayatatsaminga Prime Minister mik. So I just, to say that in English, I would like to thank the Prime Minister for such a warm and thoughtful introduction and for this very historic opportunity. I would like to acknowledge today also that we are standing on the unceded territory of the Algonquin people who have lived on these lands and waters for thousands of years. Let me begin by conveying in the strongest possible terms that I am honored, humbled, and ready to be Canada's first Indigenous Governor General. I would also like to thank Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth for placing her trust and confidence in me to represent her in this wonderful country of ours. I can confidently say that my appointment is a historic and inspirational moment for Canada and an important step forward on the long path towards reconciliation. This is a moment that I hope all Canadians feel part of because my appointment reflects our collective progress towards building a more inclusive, just and equitable society. Inutitukai na lang ang miga mamana kindaw mga hawye maya walwak sunga ami sunukisi ani ilang ino hawye maya ngina mami summakan Mary May Simon nguyunga Mary May mi ate kakatulok sumayunga inusutusunga amalo inutitut ate ka ningiukalak Quebec me ukioktato me nuna haktunga mana nuna vimik tayo suangulaktok ana naga inulak simayok inutuinaw suni halunati to kayakani amalo atataga halunangot suni halunanungan ni pisimayok angayok kagayaw hatalok simayok Hudson Bay Company kunun Pirok sa sunga tamani nuna vimisi mayunga tayo mangani ambalo inusara inutitut piusibun ni atok sunga pirok si mayunga. So permit me a moment to tell you a little bit about myself. I was born Mary Jeannie May. My Inuk name is Ningiukarlak in Arctic Quebec, now known as Nunavik. My mother was Inuk and my father was from the south. Was manager of the local Hudson Bay Company post. I spent my adolescence in Nunavik, living a very traditional lifestyle. Many months out of the year, we camped and lived on the land, hunted, fished, and gathered food, and maintained an active connection with our Inuit heritage and language. Part of my cultural tradition as an Inuk are the strong bonds that are created across the generations. My grandmother Ginny and my mother Nancy were my teachers and mentors, and these influences continue today. They both instilled in me a boundless energy for learning, self-improvement, and helping my community. They also taught me to always be proud of who I am and to keep my mind open to other points of view. From my father, I learned about the South and the non-native world from a man who had a profound love and respect for the North. its people, and its natural beauty. Combined with these experiences, allowed me to be a bridge between the different lived realities that together make up the tapestry of Canada. I can relate to all people, no matter where they live, what they hope for, or what they need to overcome. As time passed, my work often took me south. I spent my adult life fighting for indigenous and human rights, pushing for increased access for health care and access for mental health services, and working hard to build better educational outcomes for our children. So it's fair to say I've grown up twice, once in the northern Canada and once in southern Canada. As Governor General, I am fully committed to setting and maintaining the highest possible standard of work and ethic in all aspects of my duties. Je prête au sérieux mon rôle de défenseur de la diversité culturelle et linguistique qui rend le Canada unique. I take very seriously my role as an ambassador for the cultural and linguistic diversity that makes Canada unique. I do want to be clear about something. My bilingualism is Inuktitut and English. However, based on my experience growing up in Quebec, I was denied the chance to learn French during my time in the federal government day schools. I am deeply committed to continuing my French language studies and plan to conduct the business of the Governor General in both of Canada's official languages, as well as Inuktitut, one of many Indigenous languages spoken across the country. Indeed, my appointment comes at an especially reflective and dynamic time in our shared history. During my time as Governor General, I will work every day towards promoting healing and wellness across Canadian society. Takani pinasuwakanyak takani Governor General Ngulunga ulutamatsia pinasuhatolangabunga mamisaknek pichutigilugu ammalu inusahatsiaga harnit kanatamiulimat ilunalimatsia tatamani kanatamiungugatta. To me, that means stopping to fully recognize, memorialize, and come to terms with the atrocities of our collective past that we are learning more about each day. It means we must thoughtfully work hard towards the promise of a better tomorrow. I believe we can build a hopeful future in a way that is respectful of what has happened in the past. It means supporting the well-being of people by focusing on our youth and improved educational outcomes for all of our children. It means prioritizing the protection of our natural world so that we can have a healthy climate and planet for generations to come. I believe strongly that if we embrace our common humanity and shared responsibility for one another, Canada's brightest days are yet to come. I am dedicated to doing everything in my power to build and inspire that future. And to all the women and girls out there, please know that we need more of your voices and perspectives in leadership positions across this country. I hope you use my appointment to believe with increased conviction that anything is possible. To the Canadian Armed Forces, I am honored to soon be taking on the role as your new Commander-in-Chief. I want to thank you for your tireless efforts in the fight against COVID-19 here in Canada and your operations being conducted worldwide. I am greatly looking forward to meeting the men and women of the Army, Navy, Air Force, and Canadian Rangers during my tenure. There is much to be done. We need and support of all of Canadians and our governments to rebuild strong, healthy families and communities. I would like to close by again thanking the Prime Minister for his commitment to reconciliation and the courage it took to appoint me to the position of Governor General. I can't wait to roll up my sleeves to embark on our work together, and may wisdom and compassion guide our efforts. Thank you. Merci.
Now, even though this week saw the appointment and election of two women, Indigenous women, to possibly the center stage of Canadian politics, it did see the loss of Mulak Kagak in May, who announced she will be resigning from campaigning again under the NDP for parliamentary politics, as well as Jody Wilson-Raybould, who first left the Liberal Party after the SNC Lavalin scandal, served as an independent, and now has decided as of July 8th to not step back into parliamentary politics. Both of these women have still stood and stand to this day speaking about issues that impact their communities and are going about solving them differently and engaging the same problems just outside of the parliamentary system because of what they cite as toxic environments, hostile parliamentarians, and frankly, what sounds like a waste of their time.
We see suicide as, unfortunately, almost the normality in Nunavut. I have many friends and family that I have lost or that have attempted. We all have in Nunavut. That is from colonization. That is from residential schools and attempted genocide. That is from people not learning how to love as parents and teach their children love in return. Could you imagine communities filled without love? Because the children were taken away for education. This continues to carry out in ways that are horrid for communities. And those connections are very clear, and the Canadian government has done an extremely, phenomenally excellent job at hiding that history until now. Enough is enough. Charlie and I are here to help call on what is right, to call on that truth, because Canadians need to know that Indigenous people can't do this alone anymore. The lack of basic human rights is disgusting in this country for the first peoples of it. I am standing here talking about children in the ground while people suffer because they don't have a safe place to live. 1 in 3 people in Nunavut live in an overcrowded home. 1 in 3 women experience violence in the north. 7 out of 10 children in Nunavut go to school hungry. Could you imagine your child going to school hungry after yourself or your parents and your grandparents experienced all this horrible stuff I had just mentioned? And we continue to cry for help for basic. And here I am talking about basic justice, basic human rights. Children continue to experience sexual assault at alarming rates due to intergenerational trauma and these institutions that the Canadian government put in place. There are clear connections. We are not asking for more. We are asking for same. A place to live that is safe, being able to drink water and bathe oneself and afford to feed oneself and those you love. We're asking for basic after being put through a horrid history that continues to play out. And I hope today is just the beginning of those conversations, because I think Canadians understand why there is a need to be upset. But this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just scratching open that black plague of colonization. And we need to ensure communities have healing along the way.
Now, with that in mind, Mulak Gagak, Mary Simon, Jody Wilson-Raybould, also Gazanenawe Skydeer, and Roseanne Archibald all had changes to their political careers this week. That's a big week for Indigenous women in politics. to celebrate that, here is JB the First Lady with Frontlines. And here's the Strong Woman Song by Sisters of the Drum. And here is the Woollastuk Song.
Reality, unmask the truth. They're killing our youth and making native cartoons to get away with abuse. They blame us in the news. Well, they excuse the accused. Excuse after excuse. Not guilty verdicts, I'm confused. In the hands of white jurors, all smoke and mirrors. RC hating, sloppy investigating, hating on these natives. Canada thighs and knives, reconciliation snakes in disguise. While they take indigenous lives, genocide in slow-mo. I see you, Justin Trudeau, white paper 2.0. When the tension is high, relatives with the signs, women warrior front lines. This is our time. When the tension is high, relatives with the signs, women warrior front lines. This is our time. Got me bringing up the heat from the east. That's deep. Wake up if you sleep. Wearing marks on my feet like cousin. Did you eat? Corn, beans, and squash, but don't forget none. From the father and the mom, born a daughter and a son. Two spirits out of one. We evolved, you just begun. Like golden, get some. I'm a hood Nashoni queer that was raised as a deer. Had a drink in 7 years, now I'm living in the clear. Put that pain in the rear, front lines without fear. Yeah, I got a squad, it's a whole confederacy. Yeah, we got peace, it's an everlasting tree. Yeah, we gon' rise, it's our prophecy. Our time, my life, my line, my choice, my voice. Canada and United Snakes, Turtle Island comeback. This is the break. When the tension is high, relatives with the signs, women warrior front lines. This is our time. When the tension is high, relatives with the signs, women warrior front lines. This is our time.
Hi, everyone. Wachimasli, Rosa and Archibald Nitishikasan, Dagotagamo Sakata. Hi, everyone. I'm coming to you today from my own home territory of Dagotagamo Nation, and I welcome you all on the different traditional territories where you are today. First of all, I want to acknowledge the Creator, the world around us, and our place within it. My election as the first woman is a victory for all women, First Nations, Indigenous, and women everywhere. We saw a historic win with Gus Sky Deer in Ganawaki as the first woman Grand Chief. Mary Simon was appointed as the first Governor General Indigenous woman. And the AFN Chiefs have joined in this historical change. It's absolutely essential that women and girls everywhere can see themselves represented at the Assembly of First Nations in a leadership role. While my gender is important, it is not why I was elected. It is the 31 years of experiences at every political level that has gotten me here. Women are worthy. Women are capable. Women are highly skilled. Our colonial and patriarchal systems need to be deconstructed and dismantled so that women and gender diverse people can find a space in the leadership positions. The systems must be able to recognize women based on our ability to hold positions of authority and influence. Taking on this role gives women hope everywhere, not only that they can strive to be the national chief, but they will also know that they can pursue their own dreams and create their own history. My positive vision for the future encompasses a healthy Assembly of First Nations organization that strengthens First Nation communities. Further, First Nation sovereignty, jurisdiction, and inherent rights are at the center of my work. That those inherent in treaty rights will be recognized, honored, and implemented. We do have a 100-day plan, which includes a number of items, but there are some key issues facing First Nations that I want to tell you that are in some way going to be a part of my 100-day plan. The recovery of our children at former residential schools is a priority. There must be truth before reconciliation. I will support and advocate for resources for ongoing healing from intergenerational trauma, from colonization, particularly residential schools. As the new national chief, I'm going to be calling on our government partners to advance true reconciliation and build an action plan to implement all 94 TRC calls to action. With the recent recovery of our little ones, there is a healing path forward, and we can only get there by working together. Other issues that face our people are the implementation of the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls Action Plan. This is a priority. Systemic racism in health and policing. I'm sorry, I have dogs in the room and there's somebody at the door. You know how it is working at home. In any case, we have to address systemic racism in our health system, within our full justice system, and within all of Canada. We have to face the climate change crisis that we are in. We're seeing wildfires in BC that are razing whole communities to the ground. We have to take action. Our earth is trying to tell us something. Our Mother Earth is crying out to us. And this is a priority for me as national chief. I plan to work with all of the regions across Canada, all of the regional chiefs and sub-regions to build a post-pandemic recovery plan for First Nations, for their health and well-being, for their social issues, mental health, addictions, and for their economies. In fact, one of my goals is to establish a First Nations economic growth and prosperity table nationally between First Nations and our federal partners. I want to heal the path forward by creating a national consensus-based agenda for action that include the principles of peacemaking through strengthening our connections and relationships across Canada. Anytime we're in an election, we always have to figure out how to come back together. And I've always said, peace begins with me. And I will work to strengthen all of these connections and relationships across our country. I plan to fully engage women, youth, and two-spirited LGBTQIA plus peoples through empowerment, capacity building, and leadership development. I will uphold and defend and protect First Nations sovereignty and jurisdiction through the implementation and recognition of inherent and treaty rights in accordance with the basic human rights principles as outlined in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. I will be revitalizing and evolving the Assembly of First Nations organization to reflect the people that it serves by making the AFN a more responsive organization that reflects regions and nations. I am going to make the AFN a safe, healthy, and welcoming space for women and two-spirited LGBTQIA plus peoples and all of our citizens. The next step for me is to review my goals as set out in my platform document with chiefs, other national leaders, and regional chiefs. Much further ahead, there will be a planning process, more detailed work plans developed by the National Chief's Office, my staff. Then the work plan documents become a living document that we will follow for the next 3 years. So in conclusion, I am setting a strategic direction toward evolutionary and positive change. And I want to create a unified effort on longstanding issues that have faced First Nations. Miigwech Ninanaskamun for joining today. Ninanaskamun means I am thankful, I am grateful, I thank you. And Gasakitin means I love you.
Okay, thank you so much, National.
You could share why you think it has taken this long for a woman to be elected National Chief of the Assembly of First Nations.
Thank you for the question. No, I was not. I did not have any misogynistic experiences at all in this election. I had them before the election, but not during. So I'm really grateful for that. And I've always said that I look at the chiefs and my fellow leaders as my brothers. I grew up with 6 brothers, and so I think of them the same way I think about my brothers. You know, I love my brothers. My brothers are my protectors. And that's how I see all male leadership across Canada. I see us as a family. And sometimes in families, you don't always get along, but the basis of a family is love. And I have that for everyone across this country. The question you have about why it took so long, the name of this corporation is called the National Indian Brotherhood, which has a long historical link. And it's things like that that create a feeling that there isn't a place for women. It's small things like that that matter. It's language. It's what we say that matters. And everyone can see, you know, just look at these questions earlier, these negative questions. You can see how difficult it is for a woman to enter into a space like this with strength and dignity and love. And that has been the challenge for women, is that they have thought about this. There are amazing women out there, so many that I met on my journey, amazing, strong, powerful women who don't step up because they see what happens to women like Jody Wilson-Raybould, what has happened to me. They are witness to this. Even federally, we think about Catherine McKenna. You know, these attacks on women don't create safe spaces for women, but it's changing. And I was elected by a majority of male chiefs. That's important. It's important that 80% of the chiefs across Canada are men, and they elected me. And that to me speaks to the change that is happening, that our brothers understand the importance of creating space. And I want to thank Alvin Fiddler, who dropped out early. And he mentioned his daughters and his wife and all of us. I'm getting emotional right now thinking about how we all felt in that moment. And that's what we need. We need men to make room for us. And they have. Miigwech.
And that was new National Chief Roseanne Archibald speaking to the Assembly of First Nations and some journalists for the first time. Next up, we have Beshkiwe by Wabistan, as well as the Relic Kings, Are You Ready? The Relic Kings was the only band I could find with a member from the Tagwa Tagamo Nation, and that's their guitarist. Here we go. And that was Peter Martin, also known as Wabistan. Sorry, that slipped me up for a second. Peter Martin, also known as Wabistan's Bechgiwe, which is now going to be followed up by the Sisters of the Drum Woollastuk song, which is followed by Jeremy Dutcher's rendition of the Honor Song, which in turn is going to be followed by the Strong Woman Song, as performed by Lisa Muswagan and Ravenheart Bellecourt. In the attribution, it should be noted that the Strong Woman Song should be credited to the Anishinaabe Gwewag and Joganash Gwewag, who were in solitary confinement in the prison for women in Kingston, Ontario during the 1970s. Many women in P4W lost their lives because of the horrendous conditions there. We sing this song to honor them and all women.
Was my mipin, was he
And as promised, here's our interview with Russ Diabo. I was really excited for this one because of the amount of time this man dedicates to sharing information regarding what is complicated policy, analytics, and data, and structuralism. A lot of very big and scary sounding things, but important things to understand. And it takes a pretty good turn where it starts focusing on the grassroots, and it's a good interview, and I hope you'll enjoy it. That's all I got to say about that.
Did you think it was a fair election?
Well, as far as I can tell, as an outside observer. I mean, the fact is, because of, the global pandemic, it's the AFN election 2021 was a virtual campaign and a virtual election. So the candidates who ran, the 7 candidates who ran in the election, because I ran for national chief in the 2018 election, and that was pre-pandemic. So it was a lot different than what I observed this time. And, on the surface, it does seem to have been a campaign, and certainly probably a lot cheaper because you didn't have to pay for airplanes or gas or travel or hotels or stuff to go and actually physically meet chiefs and different chiefs meetings in the different regions across Canada.
Yes, because to be appointed, one of the caveats is you have to have 8 First Nations representatives from another province. Actually,
the way it works is you need 15 nominators, and 8 of them have to be outside of the region that you're located in. So, for example, the Ontario candidates, and there were 2, they had to each get 8 chiefs to sign their nomination papers from outside of Ontario. They could have all been in another province, because the regions are basically the provinces and territories. And if you do that, you get your 15 chiefs, then you submit them to the electoral officer, because you're not an official candidate until the AFN electoral officer says you are. And they verify, with the ones who signed your papers and everything, that they actually signed, even though, you have to send original copies to them. And so it's not just getting the 15 chiefs. Normally there are various forums held across Canada. Each region will have annual chiefs meetings, because the only people who vote are chiefs are their proxies. So that it doesn't, the people can support you, but it doesn't matter in the scheme of things, because only chiefs or their proxies can vote. So that's the constituency you have to basically convince to vote for you. And they hold meetings like, the All-Ontario Chiefs meeting. They have it annually. Normally, I believe it was out virtually this year. I attended leadership candidate forums. I attended one in Oneida Reserve in southern Ontario. Not all of the candidates showed up. There was a candidates forum in Yukon. I didn't go, but the other candidates showed up. They had one at the First Nations Summit meeting in Vancouver. I wasn't able to attend, but most of the other candidates attended. And so those are expenses. And I think the limit is $25,000 or $35,000. I can't really recall. My campaign manager handled that. But basically, you have to submit your financial statement to the electoral officer. Just before the assembly and the voting starts, and that kicks in once you're declared an official candidate of AFN, like about 30 days before the actual election assembly. So that's what I'm saying. This time around it's probably a lot cheaper because if you didn't travel as much, you did everything through Zoom calls or most things. And in my case, we traveled across Canada. We drove from Ontario to Vancouver, where the AFN assembly was to be held, and met people along the way in what we call the Baloney and Bannock tour, because we didn't have much money.
I like that. So on the Baloney and Bannock tour, who were the 8 out of your region that saw your vision and were like, yep, we want to work with this guy?
Well, I don't want to have to get into naming names. I mean, it was in the past, but I basically got support from Ontario. One of the Mohawk Grand Chiefs supported me. The one from Gunnesadagi, not Ganawagi. I didn't get the support of my own Grand Chief because we always differed politically. And I got a few others from Quebec, and then because that's the region, my home region. And Ontario, I got some from there, and I got some from out west. And my mover was the late Chief Harry St. Denis and Algonquin Chief from Wolf Lake First Nation. And my seconder was Chief Judy Wilson, who's the chief of the Nisqually Indian Band in British Columbia. So I did have a few chiefs from BC, who signed my nomination papers, and Alberta. So
that's pretty respectable.
So I got the 15 I needed. But I didn't run to win. When I ran, it was I didn't expect to win. That wasn't my purpose. I was pressured by indigenous women to run, to bring the message out that the Trudeau government is a threat to our inherent treaty rights. So like I said, the 2018 election was pre-pandemic. It was quite different than this one. This one, even the AFN virtual assembly, you can't really tell what's going on because I was just an observer. So I wasn't in the chat rooms or whatever it is they create for the chiefs to talk to each other, and they have caucus rooms for the different regions where they have a Zoom call. Normally, you'd be physically sitting in a convention center somewhere. And each caucus, the BC caucus, which is a big one, would have a room for themselves to go in and meet and discuss, the candidates that would come there and present to them, and they get questioned and answered on where they stood on, different issues and stuff. Same with the, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, they all have different caucuses. And you have to go and meet with the caucuses, the chiefs, or their proxies. This time it was all done virtually. And, of course, I wasn't privy to that because I wasn't a delegate. Only the chiefs and proxies get, let into the inner circle. Workings of the Zoom call.
It's a little tricky.
Controlled by AFN, or the electoral.
With the lobbies that are in there, because I've even noticed with the First Nation Monetary Bank and loans going out to tribal councils or collective nations rather than individual bands, those lobbies are slowly building up. One that's always coming to mind now is the Mikmaki coming together and taking loans out together. And then you kind of look at that and that industry that's being built up and propped up. Well, that form of business, do you think that bleeds over into AFN politics?
Oh, of course. You have to understand the AFN structure. It's based on a charter. And that AFN charter was adopted in 1985 in Vancouver. And that charter lays out different organs of the Assembly of First Nations, or different bodies, and what their roles and responsibilities are for different bodies. So the ultimate decision-making body within the Assembly of First Nations is the Chiefs and Assembly, or what the Charter says, First Nations and Assembly. But when it says First Nations and Assembly, they're actually talking about a chief. And that's the ultimate decision-making body. They're held annual meetings in July, and then they have what's called special assemblies in December. So every 6 months they kind of hold a meeting, a Chiefs and Assembly meeting. And there's another body that hasn't been really active very much for the last 10 years, but it's in the charter. It's called the Confederacy of Nations. And that is supposed to represent the regional leaders, tribal councils, and provincial territorial organizations. But, they couldn't stop chiefs from attending, so, kind of got mixed up in terms of the representation idea. Because it's supposed to be community chiefs at the Chiefs and Assembly meetings. It's supposed to be regional They've just had assemblies or special assemblies. And then underneath the Confederacy structure is the Executive Committee. And the Executive Committee of AFN is made up of the regional chiefs. And they just amended the charter now to create a new regional chief, which I think is, it has support. It passed a resolution at this assembly the last couple of days, creating a regional chief for Prince Edward Island.
Yeah.
And there's only 2 bands in Prince Edward Island. And so now the Atlantic region has, the PEI regional chief, the Nova Scotia regional chief, and then there's New Brunswick and Newfoundland. I guess they represent both regions, regional chief.
Yeah.
So you got 3 regional chiefs for probably just over 30-some bands in the whole 5 provinces of the Atlantic. And big regions like Ontario, you only have 1 regional chief. They have 160 bands or chiefs. BC has 204 bands or chiefs, I believe, and they only have 1 regional chief. So it kind of creates an imbalance, I would say. Plus, it's based on provincial boundaries, not on nation boundaries. So that's another issue about the AFN structure.
Oh, yes, especially with treaty signatories that aren't acknowledged and stuff.
Well, there's a lot of issues around the AFN charter about representation and what the regions, the definitions of regions versus territories. And Roseanne Archibald, National Chief Archibald, has said she's going to look at restructuring the AFN on all this, but she'll need the support of the Executive Committee because in the AFN charter, under the Executive Committee is the National Chief. And so the National Chief has to work with the Executive Committee to get things done in between assemblies. But they get their direction. They only have delegated mandates from resolutions passed by the chiefs in assembly. So that's what the executive and the national chief are supposed to be doing, is implementing mandates they get from the chiefs in assembly. They're not supposed to go out on their own because they have no inherent authority other than, what the chiefs in assembly give them.
Did you think...
But some national chiefs like Terry Bellegarde went beyond that. As long as the chiefs in assembly didn't reprimand them or the executive committee, he was able to get away with a lot.
At the close of his tenure, one of the only things I saw that popped up where he was actually reprimanded was for hiring a family member.
His wife, yeah.
Which is a surprisingly clean report card for someone that went through so much and worked so closely with the Liberal government.
Well, it remains to be seen. I mean, there really hasn't been any kind of, as far as I know, any kind of public audit about, because that's one of the things that, Ontario Regional Chief Archibald did was raise questions about financial mismanagement of the Assembly of First Nations, and then after that, they used total bullying. So it looks from the outside like kind of a tit for tat kind of thing. When she went after Bellegarde on, issuing contracts under $50,000 to a number of people, including his wife. Some of that information was leaked out. But anyway, remains to be seen what she's going to do about that, because I understand there is an internal report on, the accusations against her bullying, but not sure where this idea of a forensic audit or any of that thing will stand under her administration. But there are questions there about the spending and the cozy relationship between the national chief and the Prime Minister's office, or the Prime Minister.
It's very, very difficult to find the truth in all that. One thing.
Well, I'm sure that it's in some records.
Oh, yes.
The financial records and the transfers between the federal government and the Assembly of First Nations. The Executive Committee would be privy to that. Now, if that's made public or transparent, that'll be another story. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
With your Truth Before Reconciliation campaigns and focusing on CANDRIP, you've always been, you've always been you. That's a terrible way to introduce that question. How did you stick to it so passionately that you were able to listen to your community when they said that They wanted you to stand and talk about the actual threat that was coming down, and to be vocal when most of the time people don't like the nail that sticks up. You've gone from the Wounded Knee as a teenager to the AFN, and you've consistently covered issues. I was out during the lobster crisis for 10 months, and I would check my phone and see these updates to the I Will No More page and other social media pages where it's Russ Diabo says this, and you've got so much information that you just make public. What keeps that going? What's the drive?
Well, I've always been, a person that feels more comfortable with the grassroots than the elite. From my early teenage activism years to my university time, because I went to a number of universities, and then I worked with communities, not just chiefs organizations, but I worked with communities in Quebec and BC, and so I've always felt more comfortable doing community work than actually working like at the National Indian Brotherhood and then later on the Assembly of First Nations. Because you're kind of dealing with statistics at that level, You're not dealing with the real daily grind of colonialism that communities have to face, and families and individuals have to face in communities. Lack of housing, poverty, incarceration, child apprehension. All of those issues are much more real when you're doing community work, community planning, and helping communities deal with governments or industry, regarding land rights and things like that. That's where I've always felt the most comfortable. But being a policy analyst and a policy advisor to like national chiefs and that, like I've done in the past, that's a different kind of role. And the one thing you left out in between Wounded Knee and the work that I do now is I was a Liberal insider at one point. I helped create the Aboriginal Liberal Commission in 1990 with other people. So I was on the founding executive of that body when it was created in 1990 in Calgary, just a few weeks before Oka happened. And Meech Lake died. Actually, Meech Lake died while that convention the Liberal convention was going on that created that commission. And I was elected as vice president of policy from 1990 to 1994. So I was involved in helping develop the Aboriginal platform in the Red Book in 1993 in that federal election, and a longer platform, which was not in the Red Book, which Prime Minister Jacques Chrétien, subsequently when he formed government, either manipulated or ignored or distorted the promises from the 1993 platform. And then I wound up leaving the party with some other fellow executives, Dave Nawagabo, who was co-chair in Maryland, Buffalo. And we did a national press conference in 1996 with then National Chief Mikmaki. And we marched over with him to the Liberal Convention in Ottawa, where he burned the Red Book for the broken promises. And that's when I left having anything to do with any political party after that.
Wow.
But I do have that experience, which gave me insight as to how the Liberal Party operates and thinks on Indigenous policy. It hasn't changed from, when Jacques Chrétien was Prime Minister, or Paul Martin, right through to Justin Trudeau, or his father's time for that matter. So, I do have that insight too of having worked in for establishment organizations and working inside, the establishment for a mainstream political party like the Liberal Party of Canada. So that's what's given me insight into how the Canadian political system and government operate that I otherwise wouldn't have had, so I don't regret the experience. But I always point out that my time with the Liberal Party was an experiment that went horribly wrong. But I learned from it.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That's pretty wise. On the subject of wisdom, because it's one of the questions. So for the young people right now, the generations coming up that are going to be taking over a lot, like from Fairy Creek to Mikmaki, is there any message you'd have for the youth that are engaging at the grassroots or even engaging in academia, indigenous youth that is? Because a lot of the time you'll be put in a precarious situation and tested. And I've seen a lot of my friends give up certain parts of themselves. I've seen people break down after standing up to police officers or racist fishermen. What would you have to say to those people?
Well, my hope is in the people. It always has been. You know, and from my early activism in the 70s, through my academic career, to my role of working for, you know, bands or organizations as an advisor. And, you know, I feel for the hardship and the suffering that our people continue to go through, based on, you know, because we're still dealing with a colonial system and colonial structures. It's not in the past, it's present. And it looks like the trend is that it will continue on for some time. And the antidote to colonialism, as my friend, the late Art Manuel, always said, is self-determination. And so what I've been promoting is that we need to develop self-determination plans from the community level up to, you know, our nations, from the ground up. But that means we have to acquire some skills and knowledge to do that, because Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982, which was meant to decolonize us, has been used to recolonize us. Because in the 1980s, those first ministers' conferences on Aboriginal matters, there was supposed to be a political agreement on the meaning of Section 35 Aboriginal treaty rights. But those talks, you know, it came down to self-government, whether it's an inherent right or a conditional right, contingent right, based on reaching agreements with crown governments, you know, federal and provincial governments. And, you know, the four national Aboriginal organizations argued that we have the inherent right to self-government, and all the governments have to do is recognize it, and then we can negotiate agreements. But the prime ministers, you know, both liberal and conservative at the time, and the premiers and the territorial leaders from the NWT and Yukon all said no. You have to negotiate agreements with us, then we'll recognize you have self-government. So that's where they went round and round the table, and they started to use the metaphor that Section 35 is a box. And the National Aboriginal Organization said, well, it's a full box of rights, you just need to recognize that. And the Crown Government representative said, no, it's an empty box, you need to fill it up with agreements. Well, you know, the constitutional requirement to hold those talks ended in 1987. So that constitutional requirement evaporated. You know, that section of the Constitution became empty or spent. And so they didn't resolve it. Those 1980s constitutional talks ended in failure to come up with a political agreement on the meaning of Aboriginal treaty rights in the Constitution. So in 1990, the Supreme Court of Canada took over, starting to interpret Section 35, and they contained it by, you know, the Sparrow decision in 1990, before, you know, the Oka crisis happened. It was in the spring of 1990, the Supreme Court, that was the first decision on Section 35. They said Section 35 rights are not absolute. They can be validly, you know, limited or restricted, you know, for valid legislative reasons.
What they say is valid.
Pardon me?
What they would argue is valid. It's one thing that came out after the Marshall decision is they tried to impose that in a closed cabinet council, was to say...
Well, the Supreme Court of Canada, that's what they've done since 1990, starting with Sparrow, is they've laid out legal principles and legal tests, placing the burden of proof on any Aboriginal group who's asserting that they have an Aboriginal treaty right under Section 35. And so because of that burden of proof, what I'm saying, to do self-determination plans, you have to have a research process in place to collect your historical and cultural evidence. Like it or not, we need that, you know, and that could include oral history, but you also have to get your archival information. You have to pull your research together. That costs money, because to meet these legal tests cost tens of millions of dollars. You know, I'm not exaggerating. To do the historical and cultural research professionally, to collect that, to argue constitutional arguments, because these cases have to go from the trial level usually up to the Supreme Court. That usually takes over 10 years, or more. And groups across Canada are seeing that, that have had to go to the Supreme Court to argue. But through all those Supreme Court cases for the last 30 years about Section 35, it's been to limit in the meaning of Aboriginal treaty rights, as I call it, a containment approach by the Supreme Court of Canada, which I would argue the courts are in a conflict of interest anyway, because they're based on the doctrine of discovery.
Yes,
Canada's assertion of sovereignty and territorial integrity is based on the doctrine of discovery.
And every policy they're building off that's just going to be the same affirmation of their own policies.
Well, all these Section 35 policies, to negotiate agreements, are based on surrendering or submitting to the assumed Crown sovereignty. And when they say assumed Crown sovereignty, it means doctrine of discovery, but it also means the division of powers between the federal and provincial governments in the Constitution Act 1867, what they used to call the British North America Act. That's still in place, and that's where Indians and lands reserved for Indians are subject matter under Section 9124 of the BNA Act, or Constitution Act. And that's the head of power that they used to pass the Indian Act in 1876, and all subsequent First Indian legislation or First Nations legislation,
like the
or now what they call indigenous legislation. But it maintains federal control and management through legislation of Indians, Métis, and Inuit.
Yes.
So that's why the issue around, the international law is really important. But to get back to your question, what I'm saying to young people, because I have hope that young people are going to get the skills and knowledge necessary to develop these self-determination plans. So the self-determination plans you have to have a research approach to collect the historical and cultural evidence, your languages, your traditions, from oral history and archival. You need to have tools to do mapping, GIS, Geographic Information Systems. You need to do computer mapping. You need to come up with layers of information about what's happening, not only on the reserve, but your whole traditional territory. Who the third-party interests are, is there forest cover? What land use is on there, your own use and occupancy, from your own nation, your own people, but also the other non-indigenous use and occupancy. Are there forest licenses? Are there mining licenses? Are there exploration permits for mining? Are there roads? Are there towns? Ranches, farms? Is it private property? You have to kind of, in the end, look at all that and do basically an alienation report to find out what land has been taken up by third parties and what's left for your people to use and have access and use of. You have to use these modern tools like computer mapping systems to figure that out. And that all leads then to your planning process. You need information management systems. You need to have databases. Our people haven't been very good at archives and databases, but the young people have to get those skills to help merge our oral traditions with these modern tools that we have, because that's what industry and government's using on us in carving up our territories, our lands, territories, and resources, is they're using computer mapping, they're doing planning, they're allocating these resources for their own use, their own economic development, and we're getting further and further marginalized and limited in what we can do. I mean, you raised the fishery in the Atlantic, that's a good example. There's argument about the treaty-based fishery, what they call moderate livelihood. But I wouldn't rely on moderate livelihood because that came from the Supreme Court. That's an interpretation of the treaty right to fish and trade. So I would call it a treaty fishery, not a moderate livelihood fishery, because to me, that's a racist limitation that the Supreme Court put on to say, you're entitled to earn a moderate livelihood. Well, who the hell are they to say that only Meanwhile can earn a moderate livelihood where everybody else can, get a profit? But mind you, in our own traditions, we're only supposed to harvest what we need to be sustainable, right? So I don't know how they're going to reconcile the purchase of clear water foods, seafoods, with the treaty fishery. sovereignty and treaty rights.
In a roundabout
so there's
way.
a conflict there that they're going to have to address. And they did borrow money from, there's these national fiscal institutions that were created in the 1990s under Jean Chrétien. Our people haven't analyzed the implications of those. You know, they're not as benevolent as they were sold to be, because now they're part of this new fiscal relationship. And I'm talking about the First Nations Fiscal Institutions Act that was passed, creating the First Nations Financial Management Board, the First Nations Finance Authority, the First Nations Tax Commission. These bodies, you know, I believe it was a First Nations Financial Management Board or the Finance Authority. Somewhere in there is the revolving loan fund that the Mi'kmaq bands borrowed money from to purchase Clearwater Foods. But in my view, those institutions were created to assimilate First Nations into Canada's tax and property systems. Because they also have a First Nations Land Management Act out down the Indian Act into developing land codes, which I argue lead to more individual interest and private property. Fee simple.
Hey.
You know, to get rid of reserves and turn it into fee simple. So the government, my point is the government's had a national plan that for the past number of decades. More and more bands have been going into it because they're saying if you want out of the Indian Act, you either have to negotiate a self-government agreement, or in parts of Canada where Aboriginal title still exists, you know, where land treaties aren't a modern treaty. And if you don't do that, then you can go into alternative federal legislation like the First Nations Fiscal Management Act or the First Nations Land Management Act, where they're creating these national institutions. But it's still federally controlled. You know, you got the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, Carolyn Bennett, referring to these national Indigenous institutions. That's what she calls them. But they're not Indigenous institutions. They're created by the federal government through legislation, and they're appointed by the Governor and Council. The federal cabinet appoints the board members of these national institutions, like the First Nations Fiscal Management Act, or you know, the Land Advisory Board.
Yes.
These are all, in my view, federal institutions, not Indigenous institutions, and they have federal objectives, basically to offload their fiduciary treaty responsibilities and obligations. You know, is to get rid of them.
It's almost like
part of what I call the termination plan.
Being made to run a gauntlet and then becoming part of the gauntlet itself.
Well, you know, the problem is when you negotiate that way through these government policies and institutions, is it's based on a one-sided approach that they created. And it's certainly not consistent, in my opinion, with international standards, which are laid out in the original UN Declaration, which, by the way, is not the 2007 version that the UN adopted. It's the 1994 version that Indigenous peoples around the world support, but the UN watered down and then passed a different version in 2007. Many of our people don't even know that. Yeah. So there's a lot of international issues that our people still have a lot to learn about, too, what's going on politically, and how the government of Canada is manipulating the interpretation of all of that to basically domesticate our rights, you know, and undermine our international right of self-determination.
The debate of human rights versus Indigenous rights, because
yes,
it's a huge one, and it's probably going to be the one that shapes the generations going forward. Is what identity and what sovereignty can be retained and grown. What you described is amazing for laying back. And
I would recommend. Sorry to interrupt you, but I would recommend to your listeners that they get this book by Charmaine Whiteface called Indigenous Nations Rights of the Balance. She wrote a book doing a side-by-side comparison of the three versions of the UN Declaration. The original 1994 one that was endorsed by Indigenous peoples around the world, the revised version in 2004 by the UN Human Rights Commission, and finally the 2007 version was the UN General Assembly adopted. So that you could see for yourself how the wording was changed through those three different versions. And that book's available. You can order it online. But if you want to get a better understanding of the UN Declaration, rights of Indigenous peoples, you need to get hold of that book and read through it.
I'll make sure free to check it out. One I just finished was called Indivisible, and it discusses in length multiple aspects of developing human rights and how that overlooked the suffering of Indigenous peoples while it was benefiting the colonial state. In closing, I have one last question for you, because it's always an honor to be able to talk to the Mohawk from Kahnawake. Can you describe the importance of responsibility and self-determination in a confederacy?
Yeah, well, that's complicated. You know, our confederacy, our Haudenosaunee Confederacy is, is something that has survived, but it's survived with different interpretations and basically coexisting with the Indian elective systems in each of our communities. And, the way they kind of exist side by side is kind of through a coexistence approach. There's kind of like parallel systems within the same community. And sometimes they clash and sometimes they work together. Right now in Kahnawake, with the Indian Band Council just had an election. The longtime Grand Chief, Joe Norton, has passed away, unfortunately, while he was in office last year. And so now there's a new Grand Chief that was elected, Indian Grand Chief, Schubenacadie Sky Deer. And her platform was to try and bring the traditional government and the elective system together. I think that has to happen. I don't know how that's going to happen, but I think the traditional houses, the long houses, and the elective systems have to figure out. Maybe the elective systems, are basically like a board of directors to administer programs and services negotiated with the crown governments. I don't know. Somehow they're going to have to sort that out. Right now, there's still a big debate and argument between those bodies. And as individuals, some of our people support the elective system, some don't. Same with Six Nations, they're having big debates down there, and that's a much bigger community than Kahnawake. But the debate between the traditional government and the elective system, I would say that the UN Declaration, there's Article 19 from the 1994 version, and it talks about Indigenous peoples having the right to choose their own representatives through their own Indigenous institutions and procedures. We haven't seen that in Canada. Since they started talking about implementing the UN Declaration of Canada, it's been done by the federal government using Indian Act band councils. And bands and band councils are not traditional Indigenous institutions, and band council resolutions are not traditional Indigenous procedures. So somehow we need to move to creating through ceremony and protocol our Indigenous decision-making systems where we bring the people back into the decision-making and not just band councils. Because the problem with the Indian Act was that, it had the goal of assimilating, and the model that they used was a band council where they passed resolutions basically working with Ottawa, and the people were excluded. So when you have generations of that kind of decision-making, because basically the band councils took over from the Indian agents. Ottawa had Indian agents in the community in earlier versions of the Indian Act. From 1927 to 1951, that version of the Indian Act prohibited Indian ceremonies, Indian meetings, hiring lawyers. It was very restricted. In 1951, they amended the Indian Act to reduce those restrictions. So the Indian Act legacy is something that we're still having to deal with, because the Indian Act is still the main statute that controls and manages our people. It defines who a band is, who an Indian is, what a reserve is, and that's how the money flows from Ottawa to the band councils and the band offices. Traditional governments have been excluded from that in the Haudenosaunee communities, and even amongst the Wet'suwet'en, right, who have their hereditary system versus their Indian Act system. So we all have the common colonial experience of the Indian Act, regardless of what nation we come from, that we have to find our own way out of. And that's why I say these or the corporations that are on our territories once we're armed with that information and can interpret it and plan actions based on it. And I don't believe all communities will do that. Some won't survive. They will become ethnic municipalities. Their nationhood will be, erased. That's what I believe. But the ones that have the skill and knowledge, they're going to be the ones that survive as distinct organized societies into the future. So that's what I have to say.
And that's all I've got for you today. Ongoing issues that we're going to be looking to are the land back movements of the Mohawk, celebrating, honoring, and recognizing 31 years since the Oka crisis, as well as monumental changes to a lot of policies, a lot more agency, and the ongoing fight for decolonization. The next two episodes of the show are going to be focusing on the Mi'kmaq and Wolastoq nations respectively, diving deep into some of their contemporary issues and cultural identities with interviews focusing on those. I thank you very much for your time today, and I wish you the very best. To send us out, here's our playlist. And that's it. That's all I've got for you on this episode. Our outro playlist will be a double feature of Mohawk and Mi'kmaq with one non-native band to conclude it. That's all I've got for this episode, like I said, and I wish you the very best. Stay safe, be good, love each other. Samguan na mimijuagan. Okay? Now, here we go with Beneficiary by Wintersleep. Son of the Sun by Willie Dunn. Say Her Name by Bear Fox, Rich Girl by Bear Fox, and I Pity the Country by Willie Dunn.
I pity the country, I pity the state, and the mind of a man who thrives on hate. Smaller the lives cheats and liars, of bigoted news press, fascist town crier. Deception annoys me, deception destroys me. The Bill of Rights froze me, jails they all know me. Frustrated are churchmen, the saving of soul men. The tinker, the tailor, the colonial governor, they pull and they paw me. They're seeking to draw me away from the roundness of life. Silly civil servants, they thrive off my body. Their trip is with power, back bacon and welfare. Police, they arrest me, materialists to test me. Pollution, it chokes me, movies, they joke me. Politicians exploit me, city life that jades me. Hudson Bay fleets me, hunting laws freak me. Government is bumbling, revolution's rumbling. To be ruled in impunity is tradition, continuity. I pity the country, I pity the state, and the mind of a man who thrives on hate.
I listened to what the speaker had to say. My tears fell when she had us say their names. She said, say her name, say her name. We acknowledge you to help you find your way. We said your name, said your name, we said your name. And we'll keep looking until we see you again. You know, I saw your mama the other day. I just listened to what she needed to say. I could tell by her voice she was hurting bad. When she told me how you went missing, it was so sad. She said, say her name, say her name. We acknowledge you to help you find your way. We said your name, said your name, we said your name. And we'll keep looking until we see you again. We'll keep looking until we see you again. We'll keep looking until we see you again. We'll keep looking until we see you again.
Son of the sun, son of the earth, the soul of life, children of the world, daughters of starlight, and daughters of mirth, sisters of sunlight, sisters of earth, brothers of nature, brothers of old, brothers of legend, and the story untold. I had a dream a mile ago. They laid to rest with a gun and a sword, buried the hatchet, buried the snake, vowed to each other peace to make. The earth supplies and nature feeds, but we turn and quake for artificial needs. Come down to earth and stay a while. The sun is shining, just sit there and smile. I'm a brown-skinned man, that's what I am. Got a guitar and a drum, that's where I come from. Spirit of the sun, spirit of the sea, worthy of the shadow, come shine down on me. Son of the sun, son of the earth, soul of life, children of the world, brothers of nature, brothers of old, brothers of legend, and the story untold. Daughters of starlight, birth. Sisters to sunlight, sisters to birth. I had a dream of mild and cold. They laid to rest with gun and a sword. Buried the hatchet and buried the snake. We vowed to each other peace to make. Oh, son of the sun.
When I was a little girl, when I was a little girl, when I was a little girl, I helped my mother with the chores. Then I would go to the river to swim. We'd play tag and swing on a swing. I loved to feel the hot summer heat. Couldn't stand shoes upon my feet. I am the youngest of 14. I am a rich girl, can't you see? My father was a farmer, hard-working. He worked all day till the evening. His hands were calloused and full of strength. He didn't speak very much English. He was a well-respected man, knew his medicines and was Bear Clan. He took care of his family. I am a rich girl, can't you see? My mother was the kindest you couldn't meet. Her eyes, they sparkled and her smile so sweet. She loved babies, held them to her cheek. She made everyone feel unique. She was known for her butter and cream, so throughout our community, she made sure we had extra money. I am a rich girl, can't you see? Our house, it was very old. In the winter, it was so cold. Wood-filled wood stove for our heat. Bundled in blankets, we would sleep. People thought that we were poor because of the holes upon our floor. But I'm a rich girl, can't you see? So much love in our family. Now I have a family of my own. I try my best to guide them as they grow. Try my best to keep them from harm. Tell them stories about the farm. When it's time to turn out the lights, I tell them I love them and good night. Then I hold my husband tight. I know everything is going right. Both my parents have passed away, but I know I'll see them someday. I am grateful for my family. I am a rich girl, can't you see? I am grateful for my family. I'm a rich girl, can't you see? So much love in our family. I'm a rich girl, can't you see?
All my days I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide. All of my life I turned a blind eye. I don't know why I turned a blind eye. All of this time, I really can't say why. creature's habit. I'm a past and future. I'm a war never ending. La 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 la. I'm an ocean of carnage. All my days I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide. All my days I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide. Every day I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide. All my days I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide. All my days I wake up, open my eyes, beneficiary of a genocide. Drive to work all day, go to sleep at night, beneficiary of a genocide.